Welcome to Sober and Lit,
the podcast for women who want to get sober, stay sober, and live a life that's way more lit than it ever was with wine.
We're your hosts, Ruby and Susan, two alcohol freedom coaches keeping it real with stories, tools, and zero judgment.
Whether you're sober curious or all in, you're in the right place.
Let's feel lit, alcohol free. Welcome back to the Sober and Lit podcast. Hello. We are here, Coach Susan, Coach Ruby. We're here with a special guest today, Tamar Routly. Welcome, Tamar. Hi. I'll just go ahead and do your bio real quick so our listeners know a little bit about you before we get started. So Tamar Routly is the founder of Podcast Impact Studios and a podcast producer who helps creators turn their ideas into impactful, purpose-driven shows. With a background in sales, coaching, and digital creation, she blends strategy, empathy, and storytelling to make podcasting simple, sustainable, and aligned with each creator's unique voice. Tamar bridges the gap between vision and action, helping others clarify, believe in, and step into what's possible. She's also the co-host of the podcast The Sober Curator and the author of Sober for Dummies, where she empowers sober women to thrive in long-term recovery and beyond. Welcome, Tamara. I'm so glad you're here. We actually met in a podcast show, our podcast group, and we were both like, oh, we're the sober people here. Let's be guests on each other's shows. So yeah, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, you're welcome. So we usually start, and I'd love to start because I want to hear your story. Like, can you take me back to your relationship with alcohol, what that looked like, or maybe some of the early signs that it wasn't working for you anymore?
Absolutely. You know, like a lot of people do, I started drinking in high school because it was fun. And I just remember that first time I took a sip of alcohol, because I was very shy, we moved around a lot, right? And so I just thought, oh my gosh, like this is liquid gold, right? That's the first thing I thought, because all of a sudden all my feelings melted away. I wasn't nervous anymore and I could fit in. And I felt like I suddenly became this person who others wanted me to be. And so that moment, I felt like I knew I was in trouble, but you know, that the realization of that would come much, much later at 36. And I just kind of cruised through life thinking like I can't do anything major, like go to college or anything, because I'm going to miss out on the next best party, which that actually never happened, just for, to be clear, because for me, alcohol wasn't enough. I moved to other substances because I wanted to keep that buzz alive. And the whole time though, I was miserable. I didn't like my life. I would wake up every morning like many people who drink do. And I was like, what am I doing? And so I thought, well, hey, you know what? I should probably get married, because that is what people do, right? That's, if you want your life to come together, you get the house, you get the marriage, you get the dog and the white picket fence. And so I got married, and unfortunately to another alcoholic. He was a very lovely guy, but he was just like me. Of course, I had to make sure I picked someone that wouldn't call me out and wouldn't make me stop. And, we bought a condo together and got the nice car and everything. And I thought, okay, now things should be better. But they actually got worse, because that really wasn't the thing that was going to make my life better. And I think, that was the biggest thing, is I was just seeking for something to fill the holes that I felt inside. And none of that external material stuff ever helped me. And, I didn't grow up as a woman of faith. My parents sent us to church when they wanted to be alone on a Sunday. So kudos to them. Like, that's a good babysitting service for sure. But I always had this idea that, if there is a God, then why am I going through all this? Well, I was going through all this because I was putting myself through this, right? I had low self-esteem. I didn't know how I belonged in the world. And so, at the end of my 9 years of marriage, I finally hit a moment, where I just had to stop. And, throughout my addiction and my alcoholism, it was just that seeking, right? And I think we all do that, right? We try and fill the void, when I really needed was a spiritual void because I was so spiritually bankrupt at that moment. And, whatever that looks like for you, that's what I was missing. So that's kind of, how my alcoholism took me to a place where I was literally down on my knees.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hear that a lot from clients that just consuming to fill that hole, this hurty place or a hole. So what was the turning point?
Yeah. What was the turning point, or like the moment that you realized you had to stop drinking, or was there an experience? I mean, you mentioned going on your knees, and I did the same. Yeah.
Yeah. I also had, I forgot to mention, I was a very functioning alcoholic. I had a job in corporate, got paid well. And so I really felt like I had my life together. And on the outside, unless you were with me when I was drinking, it was pretty obvious. But on the outside, to people who didn't know me in that way, they thought, wow, she really has it together. And I think that was so contradictory to how I actually felt. And so in 2011, I remember just I had this moment where I was hungover. My husband had completely torn a strip out of me. He had actually left me in the bathtub full of water one night. We had come home. I was very sick. I blacked out. I was a blackout drinker. And he was done. And so I went to go take a bath because, when you take a bath, that cleans everything off you, not with your clothes, of course, which I learned that night. And leather jackets, by the way, are not very good to jump in a bath with because I couldn't wear that again. Gosh. But just for your listeners, do not have a bath with a leather jacket. And so that morning, I was sitting on the floor and I had a bottle of pills in my hand because I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I feel awful at work. I know it's probably affecting my work, even though I'm putting up a good front. And I think, as women, we do that. Like, we work hard, we help other people, we raise families. And so we're always kind of under the eye of everybody else. And I just couldn't hold that up anymore. I couldn't live this almost fake life that I was living. And so I held these bottles of pills, and I had a dog. His name was Rudy. He was a little pug, and he sat beside me because he was very empathetic dog. And I just looked at the pills and I'm like, okay, I prayed. That was the first time I think I had sincerely prayed and just said, like, I need help. Right. And that's all I said. I wasn't, there's plenty of times during a blackout I'd wake up and I was like, oh, please, I'll never do this again. God, please help me. Right. But this time I actually meant it. Like, I needed direction, and it wasn't coming from myself. And it was like I didn't hear this voice, but it was almost like, just really awakening to this, like, you're made for more. Don't do it. And I paused because, I was physically bankrupt at that point. I was overweight. I was spiritually bankrupt. I was emotionally bankrupt, and I was financially bankrupt. Right? I mean, if we had $20 left on our credit card, we went and bought a bottle of vodka before we'd fill the refrigerator up with anything. So that was that moment where I decided, okay, you know what? I need to do something else. And I didn't want to recognize that I was an alcoholic at that moment because I was so drawn to alcohol, and that was my solution to everything. So I got a gym membership because it was the beginning of the year. And I'm like, if I fix the way I look on the outside, it's going to heal how I feel, like the pain I feel on the inside. And so I'm just going to get a gym membership and I'm going to lose weight. Right. And that was my solution in that moment. But it's the best decision I ever made because I decided to hire a personal trainer, and we actually recognized each other, and we were in gymnastics together in high school. We were terrible. That's why we remember each other so well, because we were both so terrible. We laughed all the time. And now she's a personal trainer. And so we quickly became friends. And at a certain point, I recognized she didn't drink because we went out for lunch one time. And of course, because we're very, we want A pluses, right? As people who drink, we want to look good and put this whatever. So, I'd ask her, oh, do you want to get a drink? It's lunchtime. It's a little late now, but we should probably get one. And she's like, oh, no, I don't drink. That was the first time she told me that. And then because I wanted to be diligent, right? a good student on my food journaling. So I actually would, write everything down. But I went far into, another cross addiction, which was fitness and food, which a lot of people who quit drinking do. And I was full on working out 7 days a week, chicken, broccoli, and rice every day. But what I would do is for 3 days of the week, I would count 3 beer. I would just switch to light, right? Because it was lower calories. And I would drink half a bottle of NyQuil at night. And that was the way to curb my drinking. Nobody does that, And so, but I was so proud on Mondays. I would come in and I would show my trainer, look I only had 9 beer this weekend. To me, that was the first couple hours. And she kind of laughed at me because I think, we can tell who each other are by our behaviors. And in June of 2012, we were going bungee jumping, because why wouldn't you do that? It's terrifying, by the way. If you haven't done it, don't. Terrifying. And she said, hey, you know what? I go to meetings. If you're ever interested, you can come. And I was like, I had this visceral reaction. I'm like, no, that's good that you do that, but I don't need that. And I had one last bender weekend with my husband because I thought, well, it's been a few months now. I must be able to quit drinking. And I brought 1 bottle of wine because I'd done so well, for those last few months. And I ended up the first day, bottle of wine, case of beer, case of wine, and then a $200 bar tab. And I don't remember the rest of the weekend. So
Wow.
I reached out to that trainer and I said, you know what? I think I'm going to take you up on your offer. And that was how I ended up getting sober. And it was it gives me goosebumps right now because I truly believe that, your higher power puts people in your life at the right time and the right place if you're ready and willing to grab that opportunity.
Yeah. Love that.
What's beautiful. Yeah. What I love is that she was open. If she hadn't said, that's the whole anonymous thing that gets a little confusing, is that if she hadn't said, hey, I don't drink first, and then, she laid a little trail of breadcrumbs for you. And then when you were ready, you knew who to go to and she was there for you. And that's so beautiful. And it takes bravery to come out and tell people, hey, I go to meetings, or, hey, I'm sober, is a brave thing because of the stigma. The stigma is still there, but then you never know who that is going to help.
Yeah.
Right? Ugh,
Yeah.
beautiful.
And then you got sober, and then now, I read your bio, you built the podcast business, and now you're doing a podcast in the sobriety world. What happened next? I'm so curious. Yeah.
Well, that first year was definitely I ended up getting divorced the first year I got sober, which was a good thing. But then I was kind of in recovery. They call that pink cloud, where I was like, hey, I'm sober. I'm living, I had some roommates and I had a lot of fun. Now it was difficult. There was moments where I was white knuckling it. I had that spiritual experience that everybody talks about because I sought it out, right? I was like, okay, if I'm going to run my life, things are not going to go well. I need the support of other people around me, and I need to start hanging around with better people. Mm-hmm. I also need that spirituality aspect of my sobriety. And so I did all those things within the first 5 years. And in the 5th year, I started getting really complacent because I still had my job in corporate, hated it, absolutely hated it. And I'm like, is this all? I had this desire to do more because I've always had the desire to get more, to do more, right? It was just always in negative behaviors. And so in 2018, I think it was, I actually met our mutual friend, Adam Shively, and he at the time had a fitness podcast. And, I gained a few pounds again at that point. And I'm like, okay, I need to sustain this and keep going on my journey. And I just actually learned about podcasts then, which they were out for quite a while. And so he did an event in Los Angeles and I went down to go see him, and his podcast was called The Million Pound Mission at the time. And he invited a friend and I that were in his group out with the keynote speakers. And there was a whole bunch of people in the podcast industry, which is so cool for us. And so we met one of his friends, Allison Melody from Food Heals, and she was like, Tamar, what's your story? You're not drinking with us, right? And nobody drank a lot. It's that weird thing where they'd grab a glass of wine and then they sip it the whole night. Like that baffles me when people do that, because wine is meant to be drank, obviously, when you're like us. And so I said, oh, I don't drink. I'm a retired professional. And that's often what I tell people, because I don't generally get into the how I got sober. It's the, what I was like kind of before. And I think retired professional sums it up great. And she laughed and she said, have you ever thought about doing podcasting? And I'm like, well, not until now. And she goes, you should share your story. And I said, well, why? And I said, I didn't go to treatment. I, wasn't hospitalized. I didn't go to jail. I'm not like everybody. Like I was working. I did well that way. And she's like, yes, but Tamar, your story is probably more common than the other way around. There's so many women that are struggling, the wine mom culture. There's so many women struggling out there. Maybe if someone actually shared that they had it somewhat together in, their careers, other people would realize that they have a problem, because it's not the homeless with a, brown paper bag of vodka, right? That's not what it always looks like. And it's not the person who drinks 24/7. It could be the binge drinkers. So I really thought about that. And so, of course, then Adam had started his podcast about podcasting, and he actually allowed me to kind of be the beta tester for everything he did. And I was like, okay, maybe I could be a coach. I could build websites. So I started a podcast in 2019, and it was really just about sharing my journey openly about regaining control over my health, because I had lost it a little bit again. And then when the pandemic hit, he's like, why don't you talk about your sobriety? Now would be the time. And I was like, am I going to really do this? And so I rebranded to the Road Beyond Recovery. And I started talking about my journey. I started meeting other sober people. I was part of his groups that was about podcasting. And it's amazing how many people you meet in the world that are sober and that are doing such incredible things.
Right.
And so I just started doing this. And I'm like, okay, well, there's got to be more. So I talked to a friend of mine who is a sober coach as well. And she said, Tamar, what are you doing? Like, when are you going to quit your corporate job? You're doing well. And I was getting up at 3 a.m. in the morning and going to bed at 10 to sustain my full-time job and this extra side hustle I had going on. And I'm like, well, maybe I'll take a 3-month leave of absence. And then after that, I'll see how it goes. And she's like, Tamar, it takes longer than 3 months to build the business. And she said, it was like a friendly slap in the face, and I love her for it. She goes, Tamar, when you quit drinking, did you leave a bottle of vodka in the cupboard just in case you wanted to go back? And I was like, ugh. And that hit me. I'm like, no, of course not. And she's like, just go for it. And the next day happened to be my birthday, and I gave my notice. I'm like, you know what?
Wow.
We're not going anywhere anyway. I wasn't traveling anymore. So why don't I just do it? So I gave my notice, and the first 2 years were really hard because I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to help people, but I wasn't sure if it was the coaching or if it was the podcasting, because I really didn't see myself as good. Right. And since then, one of my mentors said, which I tell people often that struggle with imposter syndrome, it's like, your good is someone else's great. Right. And it's so true. And so I just kept plugging away, and I knew in my soul, in my heart, that I was meant to do something different and not go back to corporate. And a year later, I actually did a recovery summit. I met Elise Bryson, who is the host of the Sober Curator, and she started the Sober Curator lifestyle magazine online during the pandemic. And I said, do you want to be part of my recovery summit? She said, absolutely. And so, basically 2.5 years ago, she had been hired by a man who was also sober, wanted to start a non-traditional media business. And she said, come join us as a full-time contractor. And so I'm like, oh, you're going to hire me to do podcasts and all this kind of stuff and website? And they're like, yeah, why not? You're one of us. Right. Which felt so good. And I did work a lot harder than I gave myself credit for, but I think we all tend to do that. Because when I look back, I'm like, holy smokes. Like, I tell people this, like, if you ever doubt yourself, just look back and, how much have you actually overcome? And yeah, so I've been working with them for 2.5 years. And then I thought, hey, you know what? I'm going to incorporate, I'm going to make it official. And so that's how Podcast Impact Studios came to be. And I still have that full-time position. And now I'm able to take on other clients with editors I've hired.
What a story.
That's amazing.
And you somehow wrote a book in there. Yeah, we were talking before the show, those dummy books. Yeah, I all through the 90s I had those too, and you created Sober for Dummies. I love it. How did that happen?
Well, when they reached out, so I was doing a podcast with one of my friends, Lane Kennedy, and because I had met her also through Adam's podcasting group, he's like, you two women are sober. You need to connect, right? This is how cool the sober world is. And so we did, and we said, let's do a podcast together. And so we did Laughing Without Liquor together, and it was just sharing stuff we knew. She's a DNA nerd, and so she can talk about the genetics and stuff like that. And I could talk about purpose was really my big thing, was helping people see what they couldn't see. And so we just did that for a while, and we had Wiley reached out to us. And at first we thought it was like a spam, right? We're like, no, this is not true. Like, why would Wiley be reaching out to us? And so I just kind of sloughed it off at the time. And then, kudos to Tracy, who works with Wiley. She was persistent, and she reached out again. And I'm like, Elaine, maybe we better reach back out to her. Like, this kind of seems legit. So we did. We set up a meeting with her. Wonderful people. And they're like, do you want to write this book, Sobriety for Dummies? And we're like, us? And we asked, like, how did you find us? Why us? And she said, well, I found your website. I found your podcast. I listened to you guys. You guys are super funny. And we wanted to start more of, mental health series. That was what their focus was. And we've had, I think there's addiction and recover and for dummies. And then they wanted to start a sobriety series specifically for people who drank. And we thought, you know what, if we don't do this, somebody else is. And this is a cool opportunity to talk about, it doesn't matter how you get sober. It just matters that you stay sober. Right. And I mean, we both are 12 steppers, but we both are in this, belief system that it doesn't matter. Like, let's just get people to quit drinking and experience this life that we have been gifted. And so we said yes. And it was hard because, of course, I've written a few books before this, but it's so structured, and you get an editor to work with. So he was lovely. We would send our work and it would come back. And so it was the most difficult thing I've probably done, other than staying sober at times. But it was the most rewarding, because to see that big yellow book that I saw as a kid with DOS for Dummies was incredible. So yeah, that was,
I'm so proud of you.
It was real, but we answered the call.
Yeah. So
That's amazing. Wow.
Yeah. What I hear you saying, it's like when we get sober, when we get alcohol free, our lives improve. I call it a superpower, and I think you do too. It's like, it feels like a superpower. All of a sudden I wake up early in the morning. I also changed my career. I used to work in the wine industry, and now I'm a alcohol freedom coach, and Susan and I started a podcast. Can't even believe, like, what, and so all these things are possible after you change your relationship with alcohol. Yeah. Tell me more about that. Like that, you said you really work with people on their identities or their purpose. Will you share more about that?
Yeah. So when I got hired on by Work P2P for a contractor, so Dan Rogers, the gentleman that started the company, he really had this vision of building community, and he calls it redeeming work. And so, what that is like, what are we doing during the day to redeem work? What are we doing that's making work better, that is being of service, right? Which in recovery, that is the big thing, right? You need to give it away to keep it. And so he runs his business very similarly. And so I've been learning that, the corporate way of doing things, a lot of people are miserable, right? It's a top down thing. Whereas this way of doing business, we're all walking beside each other, and it's a US company. So that's why I'm a full-time contractor for them. But it's like, okay, how do you help people and be of service for fun and for free? Which for me, I was like, but you got to make money. And he's like, listen, first you be of service, and then eventually that will be the outcome of you doing things for fun and for free. And so they never had a producer at the time, and they hadn't done any podcasts. So they wanted to do an in-house podcast, which actually led to two, because Elise had the Sober Curator. So he took on the Sober Curator basically, and we could start these podcasts in-house and learn how to build a production company within the company of, we meet with people and we help them brainstorm. And I was really good. And I always have had this gift. I just never really utilized it until I got sober, and it's kind of progressed as I've gone. But having just a conversation with someone and hearing their idea, brainstorming, and being able to come up with ideas that maybe they wouldn't have thought of. And so, I was able to work with people and take them from that kind of vision idea to the first 5 published episodes. And, I love AI. I don't use it for, to produce their words, but to brainstorm and stuff. I've been able to create bots for social notes that are more real life than you get in certain programs. But we were able to help them do this. And that's what, it was hard for me it's like, we're not going to charge people. Like, we're not going to, it's like, no, we're going to do this for them because we want to help them clarify their vision. And people did that for me. When I started out, Adam let me test all of his courses in the beginning, right? And I got so connected with amazing people through these communities. Like, that's really, I think, what it's about, is communities. Because if you do something for somebody, it would inevitably, somebody would say like, well, hey, I do social media clips. Do you want me to do some stuff for you? Right. And there's this really cool exchange that happens where, you start to be able to develop things. And I think a lot of people that come to me, and, one of my early coaching clients, I don't coach other than in podcasting now, but she will not let me go as a coach because she's like, you have helped me on this journey. And I never thought it was possible. She could barely speak English, very thick accent. She's from Kenya. She now lives in the US, and she's been a nurse for a little while. So you can understand her, but she's like, I want to write a book, but I can't write a book. I'm like, yes, you can. And, I told her, why don't you try voice to text? And she's like, it doesn't understand me because of my accent. But, again, with her, for me, the reward came from being able to help her see what she could not see. And I think back to the times where if I didn't have money for alcohol, I wouldn't take no for an answer. I would try and find someone. And so by applying that into my life of sobriety and actually learning about what my purpose and my gift was, we call it unique ability. That's something I focus on now. By focusing on my unique ability, I was able to recognize that, hey, I have this gift of helping people see what they can't. And I'm not doing the stuff for them, but I'm helping them walk through the process of doing it. So it doesn't feel as scary. They feel confident in what they're doing because they have someone to help them out. And to me, that helps me stay sober as well, because there's nothing better than seeing a client publish a book and she had no, she could barely 2-finger text or type at the time. Right. And so I really truly believe that people who get sober that have had problems, and it doesn't need to be, alcoholism, but those of us that do have problems with our drinking, we're go-getters. And we just don't realize it a lot of the time. And if we can get out of our own way and actually find people, like yourselves, that are doing these really cool things and kind of just ask, how did you do that? And explore, we too we can achieve things that we never thought were possible. And that's what I've really focused on now, is that when somebody comes to me with an idea, I'm like, have you ever thought of this? And they're like, no, I can't do that. I'm like, well, I almost failed grade 12 English. I got, I think 53%, but I've written 4 books now. Like, that, never in a million years would I thought I could. So I truly, truly, from my own personal experience, believe that we're capable of so much more.
Oh, I love that so much. And that's what coaches do. We help you tap into your own wisdom and your purpose and help you uncover that. Yeah. But I always believe that clients have everything they need inside them, and the coach just helps you find that, take away the mud, they say, and find the gold underneath. But yeah, wow, that's amazing. And it is hard in that moment when you're trying to quit drinking, to hold on to that belief that there is something more and that you have a purpose. And I think that tapping into your spirituality really helps with that. I mean, so what would you have this amazing book. What if you had one message that you're most passionate about sharing with women in recovery, what would that be? What would you want everyone who struggles with alcohol to know?
I think, surround yourself with people who are doing the things you want to do, but, you're capable of so much more than you think you are. Just turn around, especially those that are just quitting drinking, turn around and look at how much stuff you've overcome already. And that's a pretty big indicator, and I don't think we do that enough. We don't turn around and go, wow, I've actually overcome a lot of stuff. It is possible, but I think we need other people to help us. Hire a coach, right? I didn't do this alone, and nor should we. And I think that's why people struggle, is that they try to do this alone. And we're not meant to live this life alone. We're meant for companionship. So, you just turn around, look at how much you've overcome, and just know, if you start to hang out with the right people, you are capable of so much more than you think is possible.
Yeah.
So much more.
And if you're a sober person, maybe take the initiative to reach out to someone too and tell your story, because you may be helping that person realize that they have someone to go to, that they can ask for help. It's really the stigma and the shame that keep people hiding. And that's, I think, my biggest thing that I just get so ticked off. And because that was part of my story, I stayed in the shadows for so long because of the shame, and until I could just ask for help, like you said, and then, and get into community. And then that was the biggest thing that changed my drinking, was coming out and being honest about it. And until you're honest about it, you can't change it. You can't change it if you don't admit you have a problem, right? And that's really hard to do. But that's the first. I'm not a 12-stepper, but that really is the first step, because you can't change something if you don't realize that you want to change it.
And then, just a little bit of hope, I'd say, is next. And that's where you see other people that have gotten alcohol-free or sober, and that others have done it, so you can do it too. And I think hope, and then, being honest with yourself, like really taking responsibility. Yep. I did drink the alcohol. It's the alcohol's fault because it's addictive to our brains, but I did drink it. So now that I know that it's a problem, let's work on this. So what a great conversation. Thank you, Tamar. Yeah. So at this point of our podcast, we always ask our guests, this is my favorite part, like, what do you do to feel lit, alcohol-free, Tamar?
I like helping people, and I create. If I can make them look good and make them sound good, that lights me up. I could, my partner would tell you too, I can work every day of the week, and there's no more days I wake up anymore that I don't want to work. So that's just helping other people, I guess, in short and sweet.
Love it.
Oh, that's beautiful.
I feel the same.
What helps you feel lit.
I love helping people and clients and seeing them make progress. It just lights me up so much. That's why I do this. I do this to help other people. I love it. Yeah, I really. Yeah.
Me too. Yeah. I left my corporate job too. Yeah. Just last June, not this past June, but a year ago. And it's been a rocky year. The first year is very stressful. I was like, wait, what happened here?
Yeah. I left my corporate job in 2022, and it's been stressful, but I love it.
Yeah.
It took me 2 years, and I was at the point where I'm like, I think I have to go get a job. I'm like, nope, Tamar, believe in yourself. This is meant to be. And sure enough, right around the corner, then it happened. So you kind of got to hold on too, right?
Have the faith.
The miracle will happen. That's
Miracle,
right.
yeah.
When you're pursuing the next step or when you're pursuing sobriety.
Yep.
Hang on until the miracle happens. That's
right.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you so much for this conversation and what you do, your service to other people. You're such an inspiration, Tamar. So glad we got to have this time with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to the Sober and Lit podcast.
If you enjoyed this episode, we would love it if you would subscribe, rate, and review. It really helps get the word out.
And remember, do something today to help you feel lit.
See you next week.